He said it right in front of everyone. 30 ranch hands frozen in place, hats in hand, not one of them daring to breathe. Caleb Whitmore pointed straight at the young woman who had just walked onto his dying land and said, loud enough for God and every broke rancher in Montana to hear, "Save my dying ranch, and marry me." She didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She didn't run. She looked him dead in the eye and smiled like she already knew something he didn't. That smile would change everything. If this story moves you, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1891 arrived in Montana like a debt collector, early, unannounced, and without mercy. The grass that should have been knee-high by June was barely ankle-deep. What little green there was had gone brittle and pale, crunching underfoot like old paper. The sky stretched wide and white and cloudless in every direction, the kind of sky that used to mean freedom to Caleb Whitmore, and now meant only one thing: another day without rain. Caleb stood at the edge of the upper pasture at just past 5 in the morning. He did this every day now, not out of habit, but out of some superstitious ritual he couldn't explain, as if looking at the land early enough, before the sun got too high, he might catch it doing something different, something that would tell him the worst was over. It never was. He had a cup of black coffee in his left hand. His right hand rested on the top rail of a fence post that had started to lean. He'd meant to fix that post for 3 weeks. He hadn't gotten around to it, and every morning he touched it, he felt the lean get a little worse, and every morning he told himself he'd deal with it tomorrow. The Whitmore ranch had a lot of things like that post. "Boss?" The voice came from behind him. He didn't turn around. It was Walt Gruber, his foreman, a wide-shouldered man of 60 who had worked this land since Caleb's father was still alive and still in charge. Walt didn't knock on doors or announce himself with formality. He simply appeared, the way men who have been on a property long enough tend to do. "Morning, Walt." The Hendersons' well went dry. Walt stopped beside him, looking out at the same stretch of dying pasture. "Their waterman came by at dawn. Said the whole southern aquifer is dropping fast. Could affect our east wells before end of month." Caleb didn't answer. He took a sip of coffee. Walt waited. He was good at waiting. "How many head did we lose this week?" Caleb asked finally. 4. "Same as last week?" "Yes, sir." Caleb was quiet for the long moment. Somewhere in the distance, a cow bellowed, low and mournful, the sound of an animal that was thirsty and didn't understand why. He had heard that sound every morning for 2 months now, and it had stopped making him flinch. That worried him more than the sound itself. "The bank letter," he said. "Still on your desk. Opened and read, looks like. I read it." He took another sip. "They want a payment by the 1st of August, or they start foreclosure proceedings." "How much?" "More than we have." Walt exhaled slowly. "We could sell the east quarter. Holloway's been asking." "We are not selling to Holloway." The words came out quieter than Caleb intended, and somehow that made them sound more final. "Not a single acre." Walt nodded, jaw tight. He knew better than to push. Richard Holloway was a land developer from back east, who had arrived in the county 3 years ago with clean boots and a banker's smile, and had been slowly picking apart struggling ranches ever since. He bought low, sold high, and didn't care what he had to do in between. Caleb had watched him swallow up the Breck place, the old Dunmore spread, and half of what used to be the Sanderson family's grazing land. Each time, Holloway had shown up right after the bank letter arrived, how as a vulture in a good suit, and Caleb hated him with the particular hatred of a man who cannot afford to show it. "I'll figure something out," Caleb said. "Yes, sir." Walt didn't sound convinced. There's something else." "Of course there is." "A woman arrived on the morning stage, asking for you by name, carrying a letter from the Hargrove Agricultural Institute out of Denver." Caleb turned to look at him for the first time that morning. Walt's expression was careful, neutral. The kind of face a man makes when he doesn't want to influence the reaction he's about to watch. "She's up at the house," Walt added. "Nora gave her coffee. She's been sitting on the porch about 20 minutes, didn't complain once. Caleb handed his empty cup to Walt without being asked and turned toward the house. Her name was Summer Hayes. She was sitting exactly where Walt had said, on the north porch, on the edge of the straight-backed wooden chair, not leaning back, not lounging. She held her coffee mug in both hands, and she was looking out at the fields with an expression that Caleb couldn't immediately read. Not pity, not boredom. Something more focused than either. She stood when she heard his boots on the steps. She was younger than he expected. Mid-20s maybe. Dark hair pinned back practically, not decoratively. She wore a plain work dress and sturdy boots that had seen actual use, not the kind of boots women bought to look like they worked, but the kind worn by someone who had covered a lot of ground. She offered her hand before he could reach his. Caleb Whitmore, I'm Summer Hayes. Her handshake was firm and quick, the handshake of a person who has had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously, and has decided to start every conversation by setting the tone herself. I sent a letter 3 weeks ago. I'm not sure if you received it. I receive a lot of letters. I imagine you do. She didn't apologize for the ambiguity. I'm a soil and land use specialist. I studied under Dr. Emil Hargrove in Denver for 4 years, and then I spent the past 3 years working ranches and farms across Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. My last position ended abruptly. A small pause. I had a disagreement with the landowner about whether his methods were killing his own pasture land. Were they? Yes. No hesitation. He lost 200 head of cattle 6 months later. Caleb studied her. He had a habit, his father's habit, inherited like the land itself, of measuring people in the first 60 seconds. He looked at their eyes, their hands, the way they held themselves when they thought they weren't being watched. Summer Hayes was holding herself like someone used to standing in rooms where no one wanted to listen to her, and who had made peace with that fact a long time ago. My ranch is struggling, he said. You can see that. Yes. A lot of people have tried to help. I know. I spoke with 2 of your former workers in town before I came up here. She said it plainly, without embarrassment. I wanted to understand what had already been tried. That surprised him. He didn't show it. And what did they tell you? That you tried to fix a water problem by drilling 2 new wells. That you brought in a grazing expert from Idaho who recommended you rotate your herd to the north pastures. That you spent money on a soil treatment that didn't work. She set her coffee mug down on the porch rail, carefully, as though she was making room to think more clearly. None of those things were wrong exactly. They just weren't targeting the right problem. And what is the right problem? Summer turned and looked out at his land the way a doctor looks at a patient. Not at what's visible, but searching for what's underneath. Your land isn't suffering from drought, she said. Your land is exhausted. There's a difference. A drought is something that happens to you. Exhaustion is something that builds slowly from the inside. You can't drill your way out of exhaustion. You can't rotate your way out of it either, not if the rotation pattern itself is wrong. She turned back to look at him. The problem with the Whitmore Ranch isn't the sky. It's the way this land has been worked for 30 years. The silence that followed lasted a full 5 seconds. Caleb had been managing this ranch since he was 26, when his father died, and left it to him along with the debts and the expectations and the weight of a family name that felt, some mornings, like a stone tied around his neck. He had poured everything into this land. Every decision he had been made with the intention of protecting it, and a 27-year-old woman with a notebook was telling him that the problem was the decisions themselves. You're saying my father and I have been killing the land. I'm saying the land has been giving everything it has, and no one has been giving anything back. That's not a moral failing. Her voice was even, not unkind. It's just what happens when you follow methods that made sense 40 years ago, but haven't caught up with what the land actually needs. It happens on ranches all over Montana. It's happening right now on a dozen spreads between here and the Wyoming border. Caleb folded his arms. And you can fix it. I can restore it. There's a difference there too. Fixing implies quick. Restoring takes time, but yes. She met his eyes without flinching. I can do it. He studied her for a long moment. Behind him, he was aware that Nora, his housekeeper, a woman of 62, who had known him since he was in short pants and still occasionally told him so, was hovering just inside the screen door, listening to every word with the focused intensity of a woman who had been praying for someone to show up and say exactly this. "What do you want in return?" he asked. "Fair wages, a place to stay, and no interference with my methods while I work." She held his gaze. "That last part is non-negotiable." He almost smiled. Almost. "Come back at noon," he said. "I'll give you my answer then." He did not give her his answer at noon. What happened instead? What no one on the Whitmore ranch would entirely forget for the rest of that summer, happened at 11:45 in the middle of the main yard, in front of every hand and worker and stable boy who happened to be within earshot. Caleb had spent the morning with Walt, going over the numbers again. The bank letter, the cattle count, the water reports, the cost of the treatment that hadn't worked, the well that hadn't delivered what they'd hoped, the feed bill that kept climbing because the pasture couldn't sustain the herd. He had also pulled out a letter he'd received 2 weeks earlier and ignored. The letter from Summer Hayes, written from a rooming house in Billings, concise and professional and laying out exactly the same argument she had made to him on the porch. He read it again. He read it twice. By the time she walked back across the yard toward the house at 1:45, he had made a decision. He stepped off the porch and met her in the yard. "Miss Hayes." She stopped. "Mr. Whitmore." Around them, the yard slowed. A ranch hand carrying a saddle stopped walking. A stable boy halted mid-step. Walt, who had seen Caleb do enough unpredictable things over the years to know when one was coming, quietly set down what he was holding. "You want a chance to prove what you can do," Caleb said. "That's correct. Then I'll give you that chance." He paused. 1 beat. 2. "If you can save this ranch before summer ends, I mean really save it, cattle healthy, fields producing, bank off our back, then you can have whatever payment you want. Name your price." Summer nodded. "That's acceptable." "And," he said. She looked at him. "Marry me." The yard went so quiet that someone's boot scraped the dirt and it sounded loud. Summer's expression didn't crack, didn't shift. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a man who has just said something that reveals more about his own desperation than he realizes, with a kind of calm, clear-eyed patience that was more devastating than anger would have been. "I beg your pardon? You heard me." Caleb's voice was steady. Even he wasn't entirely sure, in that moment, what he was doing. He told himself it was a test, a way to call her bluff, to see if she'd back down. He told himself that later, and he mostly believed it. "Save this ranch. I'll make you Mrs. Whitmore." From somewhere to his left, he heard Walt make a sound that was not quite a cough. Summer looked at him for a long, unhurried moment. Then she said, "No." He blinked. "No, no." She kept her voice calm, almost conversational, as though she were declining an offer of a second cup of coffee. "I don't want your name, Mr. Whitmore. I don't want your house, and I don't want your title. I want wages that reflect the value of the work. I want the freedom to do my job without someone second-guessing every decision I make." She held up one finger, just slightly, not rudely, but firmly. "And I want enough money at the end to fund a land restoration project of my own design. That is my price. That is all of it." She let that settle. "If that's not acceptable," she said, "I'll be on the afternoon stage." Caleb stared at her. He had managed difficult men his whole life. Foremen who pushed back, creditors who threatened, competitors who lied. He had never, in his 38 years, been stood in the middle of his own yard and told no by someone he'd just offered to marry. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "Fine," he said. "Fine," she agreed. She walked past him toward the house. Walt appeared at Caleb's shoulder, and for a full 10 seconds neither of them said anything. "Well," Walt said finally. "Don't," said Caleb. She started that same afternoon. No settling in, no orientation tour, no asking where things were kept. Summer Hayes dropped her suitcase in the small guest room on the north side of the house, changed into her work clothes, picked up her notebook, and walked back out into the yard. For the next 4 hours, she walked every acre she could cover before sundown. Not with a ranch hand guiding her. Alone. Notebook open. Pencil moving. Caleb watched her from a distance, and told himself he wasn't watching her, that he was simply standing near the east fence, because there were things to check near the east fence. Walt didn't say anything about this either. What Caleb saw, from that distance, was a woman who moved through land the way experienced trackers move through unfamiliar territory. Slowly enough to see details, purposefully enough that you knew she wasn't wandering. She stopped. She crouched. She picked up dirt and rubbed it between her fingers. She examined the root structure of dead grass. She stood at the edge of the dry irrigation channel for nearly 15 minutes without moving, and Caleb found himself wondering what she was seeing there that held her attention for so long. When she came back to the house at dusk, her boots were dusty, her notebook was half full, and she looked, for the first time since she'd arrived, tired. Nora had put dinner on the table. Caleb sat at one end, Summer at the other. It was the same table where his father had sat every night of Caleb's childhood, presiding over the meal with the authority of a man who never questioned whether his world would hold together. "The irrigation channel on the east side," Summer said, without looking up from a page she was reviewing. "When was it last cleaned?" "The channel? 3-4 years ago, maybe 5. There's a section, roughly 40 feet, that collapsed internally. It's not visible from the surface. The water flow is being redirected underground, which is why the east fields drain unevenly, and why the soil there is." She stopped herself, as if remembering who she was talking to. "It's why the grass never recovers on the east side, even after rain." Caleb set his fork down. "That channel was built by my grandfather." "I know." She looked up. "It's a good channel, solid construction. It just needs that section rebuilt. Maybe a week's work." She held his gaze. "With your permission." He hated how she said that. "With your permission." As if she needed it. As if she wasn't going to do it anyway the moment he agreed. "You have it," he said. She nodded and went back to her notes. "Miss Hayes," he said. She looked up. "You said the problem was 30 years of decisions." He leaned forward slightly. "Be specific. What did we get wrong?" She set her pencil down. She looked at him the way teachers look at students who have finally asked the question the whole lesson has been building toward, with a kind of restrained satisfaction, as if she had been waiting for this without expecting it. "You've been grazing your cattle in patterns that made sense for large herds 40 years ago," she said. "Heavy concentration in the same zones, season after season. The grass hasn't had time to recover. The root systems in the south and west pastures are significantly weakened. That's why the drought hit you harder than your neighbors. Their grass had deeper roots. Yours didn't have time to build them." "We rotate," Caleb said. "You rotate among 3 zones. You need 6, minimum. And the rotation schedule needs to be tied to what the grass is actually doing, not to a fixed calendar." She pulled the notebook toward her and turned it so he could see a rough diagram she'd sketched. "I also found evidence of soil compaction around the watering areas. The cattle are congregating in the same spots, which is breaking down the soil structure. The water can't penetrate properly, which means even when it rains, the ground can't absorb what it needs." He looked at the diagram. He had a good mind. His father had said so, in the rare moments when his father said such things. And he could follow what she was showing him. It was, he realized slowly, all things he should have noticed. Things a man who spent every day on his own land should have seen. The recognition landed somewhere uncomfortable, somewhere between shame and anger. "Why didn't any of my men see this?" he asked. "They've been seeing it the way it's always been," she said. "That's the hardest thing to overcome, not ignorance. Familiarity. When you see something every day, you stop seeing it." She said it without accusation, without performance of empathy, just as a fact. It was, somehow, worse that way. "What else?" he asked. "The well on the north side." She turned to another page. "It's not going dry. The pump mechanism is losing pressure through a cracked seal. You've been drilling new wells looking for water that was there the whole time." A pause. "I can't fix that myself. but I can tell you what to tell your pump man." Caleb stared at her. "The north well isn't dry," he repeated slowly. "No, we've been—" He stopped. He looked at the table. He picked up his fork and set it down again. "We spent $2,000 last spring trying to locate a new water source." "I know." Her voice was careful now. Not delicate, but careful. "The way you are with someone who is about to understand something that is going to hurt. I'm sorry. I wish I had gotten here sooner. I didn't know what to do with that." No one had said anything like that to him in a long time. Not sorry that things were bad in a general way, but sorry in a specific way. Sorry about the $2,000. Sorry about the wrong decision. Sorry as if his loss was a real thing that deserved acknowledgement. He nodded once. That was all he could manage. Dinner ended quietly. As Summer gathered her notes to go back to her room, she paused in the doorway. "Mr. Whitmore." He looked up. "You asked earlier what you got wrong." She held the doorframe, not dramatically, just the way a person holds a doorframe when they're about to say something real. "You didn't get everything wrong. The south barn structure is the best built thing I've seen on any ranch in 3 states. The herd genetics are strong. The fencing pattern in the west section is exactly right. Whoever made those decisions—" She met his eyes. "They knew what they were doing." She was gone before he could respond. He sat alone at the table for a long time after that. He told himself he was thinking about the irrigation channel. He wasn't thinking about the irrigation channel. The first week was a war, not between Caleb and Summer, between Summer and every man on the ranch who had been doing things a certain way for as long as they'd been doing them. It started with the grazing rotation. Summer had laid out her plan to Walt on the second morning. 6 zones, new boundaries, a rotation schedule tied to grass recovery indicators she would monitor weekly. Walt had listened. He was a fair man, Walt was, and he understood that the ranch was in trouble. He had accepted her plan with a nod that meant he would pass it along. The ranch hands accepted it with considerably less grace. "So this woman comes in," one of them said, loudly, in the stable, at a volume that was clearly not accidental. "And now we're supposed to take orders from her?" His name was Deke Paulson. He'd been on the ranch for 11 years, and he was the kind of man who mistook duration for authority. Summer heard him. She was standing 12 feet away, examining the condition of the stable's east-facing wall. She didn't turn around. "Deke," she said to the wall. He went quiet. "The 3 sections of fence you're responsible for on the north boundary. Still to the wall. Still calm. How often do you check the tension on the second-to-last post sets?" Silence. "I'll check it this week," he muttered. "I already did." Now she turned. Not angry, not triumphant, just looking at him the way someone looks when they want to be sure they have your full attention. "The tension's been wrong for about 2 months. If that fence fails and you lose cattle through it, it's going to cost Mr. Whitmore money he doesn't have right now." A pause. "I'm not here to take orders. I'm not here to give them either. I'm here to save this ranch. If you want to help me do that, I could use a man who knows this fence line." Deke's jaw moved around some response that never came out. "Think about it," Summer said, and went back to examining the wall. Walt told Caleb about it at the end of the day. Caleb sat with that for a moment. "She's good," he said. "She's very good," Walt said. "And Deke's going to be useful to her before the month is out, whether he knows it yet or not." By the end of the second week, something almost imperceptible was beginning to happen. Not in the pastures. It was too early for that. In the people. Ranch hands who had spent the first days watching Summer with skeptical eyes were beginning to watch her with a different kind of attention. They were still skeptical. These were men who had learned from hard experience that promises about land rarely held. But there was something in the way she worked that was difficult to dismiss. She was the first one out every morning, and frequently the last one in at night. She did not direct from a distance. When the east irrigation channel needed clearing before it could be rebuilt, she was in the channel herself, in the mud, pulling debris with her hands. When the cattle needed to be moved to the second grazing zone and there weren't enough hands, she helped move cattle. When old Roy Nettles, who had worked the Whitmore ranch for 23 years and whose knees had started giving him trouble, needed someone to handle the heavy section of pipe at the north pump station, she handled the pipe. "She doesn't complain," Nora told Caleb one evening, as if reporting a remarkable scientific observation. "I've never seen anyone not complain." "She complained once," Caleb said, "about the condition of the irrigation survey maps." Nora thought about this. "That's not a complaint. That's a work request." He didn't have an answer for that. He was watching Summer more than he wanted to admit, and he was watching her in ways that troubled him when he was honest with himself. Not in the way a man watches a woman out of idle interest, but the way you watch someone when you're trying to understand something about them that keeps refusing to resolve, like a word on the tip of your tongue, a name you know but can't quite retrieve. He watched the way she listened to the ranch workers when they spoke. Really listened. Not the way powerful people listen, which is with one ear while their mind is already forming the response. She listened with her whole attention, and people felt it, and it made them tell her more than they'd planned to. He watched the way she handled being doubted, which happened daily. The men would question a decision, sometimes respectfully, sometimes not, and she would do the same thing every time. She would answer the question, not the challenge underneath it, not the skepticism behind it, just the question itself, with facts and reasoning, and then she would let the men decide what to do with that. It was, Caleb recognized slowly, a kind of courage. The quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just keeps showing up. He had never thought much about that kind of courage before. He had spent his life cultivating the other kind, the visible kind, the kind you could point to and name. Standing in his own yard, watching Summer Hayes explain drainage angles to a man twice her age who was slowly and visibly realizing she knew what she was talking about, Caleb Whitmore had the uncomfortable sensation of discovering that a kind of strength existed that he didn't possess. He wasn't sure what to do with that either. 3 weeks into her time on the ranch, the moment that no one quite expected happened on a Tuesday morning. Caleb was at the north pump station with the pump man, a grizzled mechanic named Bertram, who traveled the county fixing equipment, and who had, months ago, confirmed the well was going dry and charged Caleb $20 for the opinion. Bertram crouched over the pump mechanism, following the instructions Summer had left in a detailed written note. Specific, technical, precise. He found the cracked seal in 11 minutes. He stood up slowly. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the note in his hand. "Son," he said, which was how Bertram addressed everyone regardless of age or station. "This woman, the one who wrote this." "Yes?" "She's right. Seal's cracked. Water pressure's been hemorrhaging for—" He squinted at the seal, calculating. "At least 8-10 months. Your well's not dry. Never was." Caleb stood very still. "How long to fix it?" 2 days. 3 if the replacement seal doesn't come in from Billings before Thursday. Order it today. Already planning to." Bertram looked at the note again, with the expression of a man who respects good work regardless of its source, which is the most honest kind of respect there is. "Where'd you find her?" "She found me," Caleb said. He walked back to the house and went into his study and sat at his desk and did not do anything in particular for about 20 minutes. Then he went looking for Summer. He found her at the south pasture boundary, marking new zone posts with colored flags, alone in the afternoon heat. "The well," he said. She kept placing flags. "Bertram found the seal?" "Yes." "Good. That's good news." $2,000, he said. "We spent $2,000 looking for new water." She stopped and turned to look at him. "I know," she said. "And a cracked seal." He shook his head, not at her, at himself, at the whole accumulation of it. All this time. She watched him, not uncomfortably, not filling the silence to manage his feelings. Just present, the way the best people are present when you're working something hard. "You couldn't have known," she said finally. "I should have known. It's my land. That's not how it works." She turned back to her flags, but kept talking. "The more invested you are in a place, the harder it is to see what's actually wrong with it. You're too close. You've got too much history in it, feeling in it. She knelt to push a flag into the ground. That's not a weakness, Caleb. That's what it looks like when someone actually cares about something. It was the first time she'd used his name. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. John. By the end of the 4th week, the ranch was changing. Small things first, the kind you could dismiss if you weren't paying attention. The cattle in the new grazing zones were moving differently. Less sluggish. They ate with more drive. A foreman from a neighboring ranch who rode through on an unrelated matter remarked, without being asked, that Caleb's herd was looking better than it had in a couple of years. Caleb mentioned this to Summer at dinner. She nodded. The grass in Zone 2 has recovered enough that they're getting adequate nutrition. Another 3 weeks and we'll move them to Zone 3, which has had the most rest. That's where you should see the biggest improvement in condition. You know exactly how this goes, don't you? She looked up from her notes. I know how it's supposed to go. Land doesn't always follow instructions. But usually? She considered. Usually. He picked up his fork, put it down again. Why agricultural science? He asked. She looked at him. It was a different kind of question. Not practical, not about the ranch. He could see her deciding whether to answer it the short way or the real way. She chose the real way. My family had a farm, she said. Nothing like this, small, western Kansas. We lost it when I was 14. She looked at the table for a moment. Not to drought, not to weather, to the same problem this ranch has. Land that was worn out, and nobody knew how to read the signs until it was too late. She picked up her pencil, set it down. I spent the next 10 years learning every sign. I swore I was going to know them all so I could help someone else before they got to where my family got. The room was quiet. I'm sorry, Caleb said. About your family's farm. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. They finished dinner without saying much more. But something had shifted, quietly. The way things shift before you notice they've moved. The way the season changes not in a single day, but across 1,000 small moments. Until one morning, you step outside and realize it's different now, and you wonder when exactly that happened, and you understand that it happened all along. Die. That night, Caleb Whitmore stood at the window of his study for a long time in the dark. He was not thinking about the bank letter. He was not thinking about the irrigation channel, or the cracked pump seal, or the grazing rotation schedule. He was thinking about a 14-year-old girl who had watched her family lose their land, and who had spent the next 13 years of her life learning how to make sure it never happened to someone else. And he was thinking about what kind of person does that. What kind of person carries someone else's loss long enough to turn it into someone else's rescue? He stood there until the lamp in the guest room on the north side of the house went dark. Then he went to bed. And for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, he slept until morning. The morning after Caleb finally slept through the night, he woke up feeling something he hadn't felt in almost 2 years. Useful, not powerful, not in control, just useful, like a man who has a reason to get up that isn't purely driven by dread. He didn't examine the feeling too carefully. Men like Caleb Whitmore had a habit of breaking things they examined too closely. He was at the breakfast table before Nora had finished making coffee, which was unusual enough that she stopped what she was doing and looked at him. You look different, she said. I slept. I know, I could hear it. She poured his coffee. Summer's already gone out. She left at first light. He took his cup. She does that every morning. I know she does. Nora set the pot down and looked at him with the particular frankness of a woman who had known him since he was 8 years old and felt she had earned the right to it. I'm just making conversation, Caleb. He drank his coffee. She asked me last night, Nora said, turning back to the stove with studied casualness. About your father, what he was like. Caleb's cup stopped halfway to his mouth. What did you tell her? The truth, that he was a hard man who loved this land and didn't always know how to love the people on it. A pause. She just nodded, like she already understood. Caleb set his cup down. He went outside to find her. She was at the East Channel, already knee-deep in the work she'd been planning since day one. 2 ranch hands were with her. Not assigned by Walt, Caleb noticed. Volunteer. Deke Paulson was one of them, which meant something had shifted in the 11 days since she'd spoken to him in the stable. Summer was directing the clearing operation with the same method she used for everything. Specific instructions, reasons given for each one, no unnecessary words. The men worked with a focus Caleb hadn't seen from them in a long time. He stood back and watched. After a while, she looked up and saw him. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He looked at the channel. "How long today?" "We'll get the debris cleared by noon. The rebuild of the collapsed section starts this afternoon if Walt can spare 2 more men." She wiped her hands on her work trousers. "I found something this morning you should probably see." She climbed out of the channel and walked him 30 feet south to a section of ground that looked, to his eye, like ordinary dead grass. She crouched down, pulled back a section of the dry top layer. Underneath, pale, thin, but unmistakably there, was a thread of green. "Root recovery," she said. "Zone 1, Section B. It's starting." She looked up at him. 2 weeks earlier than I projected." He stared at that thread of green. It was smaller than his thumb. It was barely visible, and it hit him somewhere in the chest like a physical thing. "That's—" He stopped. "I know," she said quietly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. She looked at him for just a moment. Not with triumph, not with sentimentality, just with the steady, clear gaze of someone who understood what they were looking at. And then she stood up and went back to the channel. Caleb stayed crouched over that patch of ground for another full minute. That was the morning everything changed direction. Not the big things yet. Those would come. But the direction changed on that Tuesday morning, crouched over a thread of green the size of his thumbnail, and Caleb felt it the way you feel a shift in wind. Not because you can see it, but because something in your body recognizes it before your mind has time to name it. The ranch was not dead. He had been treating it like a dying thing for so long that he had forgotten, or maybe never truly believed, that it might not be. He stood up. "I went to find Walt. I need 2 men at the East Channel this afternoon," he said. "Take them from the fence detail." "The fence detail's behind," Walt said. "Then we'll catch it up next week. The channel comes first." Walt looked at him with that careful, neutral expression. Then he nodded. "Yes, sir." That was all. But as Caleb walked away, he heard Walt exhale, slowly, quietly. The exhale of a man who had been holding his breath for a long time and was finally, cautiously, letting it go. The week that followed moved at a different pace than the weeks before it. Summer's plan was working, and the ranch felt it. Not in grand, dramatic ways. In the texture of daily life. The cattle moved better. The morning sounds were different. Less of that low, mournful bellowing. More of the ordinary restlessness of animals that are eating enough and drinking enough and have enough energy to be difficult. Old Roy Nettles, whose knees hurt and who had been on the ranch longer than anyone, stopped Caleb in the yard one afternoon. "The girl," Roy said, which was how most of the men still referred to Summer despite themselves. "She came out to the west pasture yesterday morning while I was checking the fence. Sat with me about 20 minutes, just talking. Asked me about the land 30 years ago, what it looked like, what the grass was like, what the water was like." He paused. "I told her, and she wrote it down." "She's building a picture," Caleb said. "I know, that's what I mean." Roy looked at him steadily. "She asked about your father, too, how he managed the grazing back in his day. I told her, and she said, that was exactly right for the 1860s. The science has moved on since then, but he was using the best information he had." Roy's expression did something complicated. "I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the men here, we felt bad for years, like we'd failed your daddy's ranch, like we'd let it get bad." She didn't say nobody did anything wrong, but somehow what she said made it feel like nobody did. Caleb looked at the old man for a moment. "Thank you for telling me that, Roy." Roy nodded once and walked away. That evening, Caleb found Summer on the north porch, writing in her notebook by lamplight. This had become a nightly ritual. After dinner, She would compile her observations from the day, plan the next day's work, record what was changing and what still needed attention. He brought 2 cups of coffee without being asked, one for her, one for himself, and sat in the other chair without waiting for an invitation. She looked at the cup, then at him. Then she went back to writing. "The East Channel rebuild is going well," he said. "Better than expected. The original stonework your grandfather used is solid. We're mostly relaying what fell in rather than rebuilding from scratch." She turned a page. "We should have water running through it within the week. Roy told me what you said to the men, about my father's methods." She paused in her writing, just barely. "I meant it," she said. "I know you did." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "That's why I'm telling you." She looked at him then, not the quick professional glance she used in work discussions. A longer look, the kind that meant she was actually seeing him, not just processing him. "You're harder on yourself than you are on anyone else," she said. "That's how it's supposed to be." "Says who?" He opened his mouth, closed it. The honest answer was, his father. His father had believed that the man at the top of anything bore full responsibility for everything beneath him, and that softness toward yourself was the first step toward softness toward the work, and that softness toward the work was how you lost things. Caleb had absorbed that the way children absorb everything their fathers believe, not through instruction, but through atmosphere, through the air of the house, through the 1,000 small moments that make up a childhood. "Old habits," he said finally. "Old habits are what I'm here to fix," she said. And for just a moment, the faintest thing that might have been a smile crossed her face. He felt it like a warm current, unexpected, in cold water. He didn't examine it. He drank his coffee, and they sat in a quiet that was, for the first time, genuinely comfortable. Then the silence broke. Not from inside the house. From the road. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving at a deliberate pace. The kind of pace that says, "I know where I'm going, and I want you to hear me coming." Caleb was out of his chair before the sound fully registered. A man on horseback appeared at the edge of the yard, flanked by 2 others. He was well-dressed, thick-shouldered, with a hat that had never worked a day in its life. He sat his horse the way men sit horses when they've learned to ride for appearance, rather than use. Richard Holloway. "Whitmore," Holloway said, as if they were old friends, which they had never been, and both knew it. "Evening. Sorry for the late hour. Saw the light from the road." Caleb stepped off the porch. Holloway. "Hate to drop by unannounced." He didn't look like he hated it at all. His eyes moved past Caleb, to the porch, to the woman sitting there with the notebook, to the coffee cups on the rail. "I see you have company." A pause that lasted just 1 beat too long. "I won't keep you." "What do you want?" "Same as always." Holloway's smile was the kind that could mean anything. "I want to make you a fair offer on the East Quarter." "I've been patient, Caleb. I respect patience. I think it's the most undervalued quality in business. But I've also got investors, and investors have timelines. The East Quarter isn't for sale. Everything is for sale at the right price." Holloway tilted his head slightly. "The bank letter went out, what? 3 weeks ago?" "I have sources, Caleb. I know what the terms are. I know what the timeline is." His voice stayed pleasant, conversational. The kind of pleasant that's worse than hostility. "I'm not your enemy. I'm offering you a way out of a corner before it gets tighter." From behind him, Caleb heard Summers' chair scrape the porch floor. He didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on Holloway. "Get off my land," Caleb said. Holloway let the smile settle for one more moment, then drew his horse around without hurry. "My offer stands. You know where to find me." He touched the brim of his hat toward the porch. "Ma'am." And he rode back the way he'd come. Caleb stood in the yard until the hoofbeats faded. Then he turned. Summer was standing at the porch rail, both hands on it, watching the road. "That was Holloway," he said. "I know who he is." She looked at Caleb. "He came by the Reckoner property 2 days after the owner got his bank letter. The Dunmore place, same thing, 3 days after." She met his eyes. "He has someone at the bank." Caleb went still. That's a serious accusation. It's a pattern. Her voice was level. I've seen it twice. The timeline's too clean to be coincidence. He stood in the yard for a moment, absorbing that. He can't force you to sell, she said. No, and the ranch is turning around. Yes. Then he's bluffing. She stepped back from the rail. Don't give him what he needs, which is for you to panic. Caleb looked at her. He thought about the version of himself from 8 weeks ago, the man who had stood at the edge of the upper pasture at 5 in the morning, holding an empty coffee cup and looking at a dying field with the hollow eyes of someone who has already decided, in some deep wordless place, that it's over. That man would have panicked. I'm not going to panic, he said. I know, she said simply. She went back inside. He stood in the yard a moment longer. The thing Holloway had said was still working through him. Not the offer, not the threat, but the way he'd looked at the porch, at Summer, at the 2 coffee cups, like he was calculating something that had nothing to do with land. Caleb didn't like it. He went back inside and said nothing about it to anyone, but he remembered it. 3 days later, Richard Holloway rode back through the gate. This time, Caleb wasn't there. Holloway rode straight to the East Channel, where Summer was overseeing the final phase of the rebuild. He came alone this time, which was its own kind of message. One rider, no escort, no pressure, casual, friendly. He watched the work for a moment from horseback, then looked down at Summer. Impressive, he said. This is good work. Better than I'd have expected given the timeline. Summer kept watching the channel. Thank you. I understand you're the one responsible for the recovery plan. I'm responsible for the implementation. The land does most of the work. Holloway made a small sound of amusement. Modest. He shifted in the saddle. I heard about you before you arrived here, Miss Hayes. Hargrove speaks very highly of you. So do the people on the Rennick property in Wyoming. She turned to look at him then. Not because the compliment moved her, because she wanted to see his face while he said what he was actually there to say. I'll get to the point, Holloway said, reading that look correctly. I want to offer you a position. Not on this ranch, on a new development project I'm putting together. 5,000 acres east of Billings, going to market as premium cattle land within 3 years. I need someone who can make it look like what I'm going to be selling it as. He paused. I pay 3 times what you're making here, with a bonus when the project sells. The channel workers had slowed down. Not stopped. They were experienced enough to keep moving, but slowed, in the way people slow when they don't want to miss what's happening nearby. Summer looked at Holloway for a long, steady moment. Make land look like what you're going to be selling it as, she repeated. He heard what she'd emphasized. His expression didn't change. I said what I said. You want someone to make degraded land appear healthy enough to sell at premium prices. I want someone with your skills to maximize the land's presentation before it goes to market. Those are the same thing. She turned back to the channel. No. Silence. Miss Hayes, no. She didn't turn around. The people who'd buy that land would build ranches on it, Mr. Holloway. They'd bring families there. They'd invest everything they have based on what you showed them. She picked up her work gloves from the rail. I know what it looks like when that goes wrong. I watched it happen to my own family. I'm not going to be the reason it happens to someone else's. Another silence. A longer one. When Holloway spoke again, his voice had lost the warmth. Not angry, just stripped of performance. You're throwing away a significant opportunity over sentiment. I'm making a decision consistent with why I do this work. She pulled on her gloves. Goodbye, Mr. Holloway. He sat there for a moment longer. Then he turned his horse without another word and rode out of the yard. The channel workers kept working. None of them said anything. But that evening, when Caleb came out to check the progress, Deke Paulson was the one who told him what had happened, directly, without being asked. Standing straight, with the manner of a man who has decided that loyalty means saying the thing that needs to be said. Caleb listened to the whole account. Then he said, Where is she? South pasture, checking the Zone 2 grass. He found her at the edge of the second grazing zone, crouched over a section of recovering grass with her notebook open. The light was going amber and long, the way it does in Montana in late summer, and she was writing fast, focused, completely absorbed. Summer. She looked up. He stopped a few feet away. He wasn't sure exactly what he'd come to say. He had walked out here with a clear intention, and now that he was here, the words had rearranged themselves into something less specific. "Dake told me," he said. She went back to writing. "I figured." "You turned him down?" "Yes." "He offered you 3 times your current wages?" "Yes." "And you told him no?" She looked up at him again, and there was something in her expression that was not impatience exactly, but close to it. The look of a person who finds it faintly exasperating to be asked to explain something that seems, to them, perfectly obvious. "I told you why I do this work," she said. "First night at dinner. Did you think I was being poetic?" "No." He looked at the grass she'd been examining, then at her. "I thought you might have a price." "Everyone has a price," she said. "Mine just isn't money." He let that settle. "What is it?" he asked. She closed her notebook, stood up, looked at him with the straightforwardness that he had come to expect from her, and still, each time, was slightly unprepared for. "Doing the thing right," she said. "Doing it so it lasts. Doing it so in 30 years, some other family doesn't stand on a piece of land and watch it die because no one taught them how to take care of it." She looked at the grass. "That's my price. Getting to do the work the way it should be done." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Holloway's going to come back," he said. "I know. Not with a job offer next time. I know that too." She met his eyes. "He needs you to fail. If this ranch recovers, it proves the land here is worth what he keeps telling buyers it isn't. If you hold on, it costs him." She paused. "He's not going to stop." "No," Caleb agreed. "He's not." Something moved between them in that pause. Not spoken, not named, but real. The recognition of a shared enemy has a way of making people feel less alone. Caleb felt it. And from the slight change in Summer's expression, a fractional softening around the eyes, there and gone, he thought she might feel it too. "Go back to work," he said. She almost smiled. "I never stopped." He left her there and walked back toward the house, and he was thinking about Holloway. And he was thinking about what Holloway might do next. And underneath all of that, in the place where thoughts happen that you don't fully admit to, he was thinking about a woman who could have been gone today and had chosen to stay. He didn't examine it. He just walked faster. The letter arrived 4 days after Holloway's visit to the channel. It came through the county clerk's office and was delivered to the ranch by a rider. Caleb didn't recognize. It was addressed to Caleb formally. Full name, full title, and it came from a law firm in Helena. Caleb read it at his desk with Walt sitting across from him. When he finished, he set it down. "What does it say?" Walt asked. "Holloway is filing a claim with the water board." Caleb's voice was controlled. "He's asserting that the repairs to the east irrigation channel have altered the natural water flow on land adjacent to his recent acquisition. He's claiming the repairs are diverting water that he has prior rights to." Walt stared at him. "The man bought that adjacent land 3 weeks ago." "I know. Prior rights would require—" "I know, Walt." He picked up the letter, set it down again. "It's not a real claim. It's a delay tactic. If he gets the water board to order a halt on the channel while they investigate, we lose the benefit of the repair for the rest of the summer. It sets us back 2 months. He looked at the letter. "And a legal response costs money we don't have." Walt was quiet. "He's not trying to win the claim," Caleb said. "He's trying to slow us down long enough to make us miss our bank payment." Walt exhaled. "What do we do?" "I need to think." Walt left. Caleb sat alone with the letter for a long time. He had fought a lot of things in his life: weather, drought, grief, debt. He had not fought a man who fought through lawyers and water boards and the slow, grinding machinery of legal process. He did not have the money for that fight, and Holloway knew it. He heard footsteps in the hall. He knew the sound. Summer appeared in the doorway. She read his face before he said a word. What happened? He handed her the letter without speaking. She read it. Her eyes moved steadily through it, and when she finished, she looked up. He's moved faster than I expected, she said. You expected this? Not this specifically, something like it. She set the letter on the desk. He can't beat you on the land anymore. The recovery is too far along, so now he's going after the legal mechanism. I can't afford a legal fight. You might not need one. She sat down across from him, uninvited, direct, the way she did everything, and leaned forward. The water board will require a survey before they order any halt. That survey takes time to schedule and time to conduct. We have a window. She looked at him steadily. If the channel is fully operational and producing documented results before the survey happens, the claim becomes harder to argue. They'd be asking you to dismantle something that's demonstrably working and demonstrably not affecting adjacent water rights. How long to have documented results? Real results? 3 weeks. But preliminary data I could put in writing, with measurements and flow rates? She calculated. 10 days. You're sure? I'm sure I can document what's already happening. I'm not sure the water board will care, but it's the best play we have. Caleb looked at her. This woman had been on his ranch for just over a month. She had rebuilt his irrigation channel, remapped his grazing zones, identified the problem with his north well, turned the skepticism of his entire workforce into something close to respect, and turned down a job offer that would have paid her 3 times more to do work she didn't believe in. And now she was sitting across from him at the desk where his father used to sit and telling him how to fight a man who had, until very recently, seemed unbeatable. 10 days, he said. 10 days. Then start tonight. She stood up. She picked up the letter and took it with her. For reference, he understood, not sentiment. She was already thinking about measurements and flow rates and documentation, her mind 2 steps ahead of the conversation. At the door, she stopped. Caleb. Yes. She turned. He's going to keep coming. Whatever we do in the next 10 days, he'll find another angle. Her eyes were steady, direct, unsparing. You need to be ready for that. I know. Are you? He looked at her for a moment. I didn't know I was ready for any of this, he said. But here I am. She held his gaze for just a beat longer than strictly necessary. Then she left. He listened to her footsteps move down the hall, across the kitchen, and out the back door. Outside, somewhere in the recovering pasture, a coyote called once, long and high, into the dark. Caleb sat at his desk and did not feel afraid. That itself was something new. He pulled a sheet of paper toward him and started writing. Not to the bank, not to the water board, not to his lawyer in Billings, whom he could barely afford. He was writing down what this ranch was, what it had been, what it was becoming. He wasn't sure why. He only knew it felt important to say it in his own words, while there was still time, while there was still a chance it would be true. The 10 days Summer had promised turned into 9. On the morning of the 9th day, she walked into Caleb's study before breakfast and set a 12-page handwritten document on his desk. Flow measurements, soil absorption rates, water table readings taken at 3 points along the East Channel, comparative data from the adjacent land, Holloway's recent acquisition, showing no measurable change in water diversion before and after the channel repair. Caleb picked it up and read the first 3 pages standing up. This is... He stopped. This is thorough. It needs to be. She poured herself coffee from the pot. Nora had left on the side table, uninvited, the way she'd started doing in the past 2 weeks without either of them acknowledging that she had. I've also written a letter to the water board requesting that their surveyor contact me directly before the inspection. If I can walk him through the channel myself, it's harder to misrepresent what's there. They may not agree to that. They may not, but asking costs nothing. She sat down across from him. You should send your copy to the bank at the same time. Let them see the ranch is recovering. Don't wait for them to come to you. He lowered the document. You're telling me how to manage my bank now. I'm telling you how to manage your information. She didn't blink. There's a difference. The bank doesn't know what's happening out here. All they have is the last report, which was from before the channel was repaired, before the north well pump was fixed, before the grazing rotation started showing results. They're making decisions based on a ranch that doesn't exist anymore. She held his gaze. Show them the ranch that does. He looked at the 12 pages in his hand. I thought about the version of himself from 9 weeks ago, the man who had stood in this same study at 2 in the morning, reading the bank letter for the 4th time, trying to find language in it that wasn't there. That man had believed the story was already over, that the ending was already written, and the only question was how much of his pride he could salvage from the wreckage. I'll have Walt ride it to Billings today, he said. Good. She stood up. I'll be at the south pasture. She was at the door when he said her name. She stopped, turned. This? He held up the document. The 12 pages of data that had taken her 9 days of pre-dawn measurements and late-night calculations to produce. I couldn't have done this. She looked at him steadily. That's why I'm here. That's not what I mean. He set the document down. I mean, I want you to know that I see it. The work. Not just what it produces, the work itself. He paused, and he was not a man who paused easily, who left himself exposed in the space between sentences. I see you in it. The room went quiet. Summer's expression did something it rarely did. It opened. Just slightly. Just for a moment. Like a door pushed an inch ajar before someone remembered to be careful. Then she nodded. Once. Thank you, she said. She left. Caleb stood at his desk for a moment after her footsteps faded. Then he picked up the document and went to find Walt. The reply from the water board arrived 6 days later, and it was not what Holloway had planned for. The board's surveyor, a methodical man named Gerald Pruitt, who had been measuring water rights in Montana for 19 years and had the particular stubbornness of a man who does not like being used as someone else's instrument, had received Summer's letter and had, apparently, found her data interesting enough to respond to directly. He agreed to meet with her on site before conducting the formal survey. Caleb found out about this when Walt handed him Pruitt's reply letter at noon and said, without any particular expression, "She wrote to him without telling you she was going to." "I know. You're not bothered by that?" Caleb handed the letter back. "If she'd asked me first, I might have told her it was too aggressive. She knew that." He turned back toward the house. She was right not to ask. Walt watched him walk away with an expression that, on a less restrained face, might have been a grin. Gerald Pruitt arrived on a Thursday morning with a measuring kit, a level, and the quiet, unhurried manner of a man who has seen enough attempts to manipulate his findings that he had developed a natural immunity to them. He shook hands with Caleb, declined coffee, and said he'd like to begin at the channel. Summer was already there. Caleb watched from a distance as she walked Pruitt through the repair work, pointing, explaining, answering his questions with the same steady specificity she brought to everything. Pruitt crouched. He measured. He asked follow-up questions that Caleb couldn't hear from where he stood. Summer answered them without consulting her notebook, which meant she had the numbers memorized. After 2 hours, Pruitt straightened up and wrote something in his ledger. He and Summer talked for another 10 minutes. Then Pruitt walked over to Caleb. "Mr. Whitmore." He tucked his pencil away. "I've seen enough. The claim that your channel repair is diverting water from the adjacent property is not supported by the physical evidence. I'll file my preliminary finding with the board by end of week." A pause. "My recommendation will be that the claim is without merit." Caleb kept his face composed. "Thank you for coming out, Mr. Pruitt. Thank Miss Hayes. She made my job considerably easier." He picked up his kit. "Whoever filed that claim," he said it without naming names, though they both knew exactly whose name he meant, misjudged how much documentation was already in place. He tipped his hat. "Good day." He rode out. Caleb turned to Summer. She was writing in her notebook, not looking up. "Without merit," Caleb said. That's what he said. "Summer." She looked up. I didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. She saw it in his face, the weight lifting, the specific relief of a man who has been bracing against a wall he believed might collapse, and has just been told the wall is holding. "Don't celebrate yet," she said, but her voice was softer than the words. "I know." He looked at the channel, clean, rebuilt, with water running through it at a volume it hadn't carried and that this woman had saved, and he let himself feel it. The fragile, precious thing that hope is when it comes back to a place that had given up on it. Then he turned around. "Back to work," he said. "Already there," she said. 2 days after Pruitt's visit, the letter from the bank arrived. Not a threat this time. A question. The loan officer, a man named Aldrich, who had sent the foreclosure warning and whom Caleb had been avoiding mentally for weeks, was asking for a meeting. Not demanding. Asking. The language was different from the previous letter, less formal, more human. Caleb showed it to Summer at dinner. She read it, looked up. He got the recovery report. Apparently. And he wants to see the situation in person before making a final decision on foreclosure. She set the letter down. That's good. That means he's not certain anymore. Or he wants to see what he's taking before he takes it. Maybe. She thought about it. No. If he were certain, he wouldn't write this way. The tone is, he's leaving a door open. She looked at him. You need to go to that meeting. I was going to go. And you need to take the documentation. I was going to take it. She sat back. The faintest trace of amusement. You knew what to do. I have my moments. It was the first genuinely light thing he had said to her in weeks. She registered it with a quick look, surprised maybe. And then she laughed. Not much, not long, but real. Caleb Whitmore had not heard a woman laugh in his house in a very long time, and the sound of it hit him somewhere so unexpected that he had to look down at his plate and focus on something neutral until the feeling passed. It did not entirely pass. He went to Billings on Friday morning, and he brought every page of Summer's documentation, and he sat across from Aldrich at the bank for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and when he walked out, he had a revised payment schedule that gave the ranch 4 months of room instead of 1. It was not solved, not permanently. But the door that had been closing was open again. He rode home faster than he'd ridden in years. He pulled up in the yard, and Nora was on the porch, and he called out before he'd dismounted. Where is she? West pasture, Nora said. She's been out there since... He was already moving. He found Summer at the far boundary of the west pasture, on her hands and knees, examining the root structure of grass that had begun recovering in the second week of the new rotation. She heard him coming and stood up, dusting her hands on her trousers. She read his face before he said a word. Something happened in her expression, a kind of brightness, quickly controlled. 4 months, he said. She exhaled. A long, slow exhale, and he realized she had been holding tension since the day he'd left for Billings, carrying it without showing it, the way she carried most things. 4 months is enough, she said. It's enough if the ranch keeps improving. It will keep improving. She said it simply, without drama, the way she stated things that were factual. The west pasture alone will show enough recovery in the next 8 weeks to significantly increase your carrying capacity. That's more cattle, which is more income before end of year. She paused. You're not going to lose this place, Caleb. He looked at her. He had been told things would be fine before. By Walt, by Nora, by well-meaning neighbors who didn't know what they were talking about. They had all meant it kindly, and it had never meant anything to him because they couldn't actually know. Summer could know, and she was saying it. I believe you, he said. She didn't do anything theatrical with that. She just nodded once, the nod of someone accepting a statement as the practical matter it was. But her eyes said something else. I need to finish checking this section before dark, she said. He nodded and walked back toward the house, and halfway there he stopped and just stood for a moment in the recovering pasture, listening to the sound of the land, which was different now than it had been 8 weeks ago. Not silent anymore. Not the hollow quiet of depleted ground. Something alive in it, beneath it, moving again. He put his hand flat on the grass. Still thin. still fragile, but rooted. He got up and kept walking. The twist that came next arrived not from Holloway, not from the bank, and not from the land. It came from Roy Nettles, on a Tuesday evening, in the awkward and reluctant way that men deliver news they wish they didn't have. Roy came to the house after dinner and stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and his knees bad and his face carrying the expression of a man who has been wrestling with something for several days and has finally decided that not saying it is worse than saying it. Caleb was at the table. Nora was washing dishes. Summer had already gone to her room. "Boss," Roy said, "I need to tell you something." "Sit down, Roy." Roy sat. He turned his hat in his hands 3 full rotations before he spoke. "Holloway came out to the bunkhouse," he said. "Last week. Tuesday, I think. After you went to Billings." Caleb was still. "He came to the bunkhouse," he repeated slowly, "to talk to the men." Roy's jaw tightened. "Offered bonuses. Real money, boss. More than most of these men make in 3 months. To anyone who'd report back to him on the recovery progress. What was working, what wasn't, what Miss Hayes was doing specifically." He looked at his hat. "And he offered extra to anyone who'd be willing to slow things down. A broken tool here, a gate left open there, nothing traceable." The kitchen was so quiet that the sound of Nora's dishcloth stopping was audible. "Which men?" Caleb asked. His voice was very even, the kind of even that takes effort. "2 of the newer ones, Garrett and the boy from Livingston whose name I can never remember." Roy met his eyes. "They took the reporting money. I don't think they took the other offer, but I can't be certain." "And you?" Roy's chin came up. "I told him to get out of the bunkhouse before I threw him out myself. Then I had words with Garrett and the other one that I won't repeat in a lady's house." His jaw was set hard. "I should have come to you the same night. I waited because I wanted to think it through. I'm sorry for the wait." Caleb looked at the old man for a moment. "You came," he said. "That's what matters." Roy nodded. He stood, replaced his hat, and walked out without another word. A man who had done a difficult thing and was tired and ready to be done with it. Caleb sat at the table. Nora dried her hands on her apron and said, with the controlled fury of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize genuine evil when it appears in her kitchen conversation, "That man is something beyond a land developer." "Yes," Caleb said. "What are you going to do about Garrett?" "In the morning." He pushed back from the table. "And Summer? She should know." He stopped. He thought about Summer asleep in the north room, 12 pages of documentation, and a recovered irrigation channel, and 4 months of breathing room behind her, and Holloway circling closer now, not through lawyers or water boards, but through the men who worked alongside her every day. "I'll tell her in the morning," he said. "Tonight there's nothing to do about it." He went to his room. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark, and he thought about Richard Holloway, and he thought about what a man like that does when the direct approaches don't work. The legal claim that failed, the job offer that was refused. And he understood, lying there in the dark, that they were moving into different territory now. Holloway wasn't trying to buy or delay anymore. He was trying to dismantle from the inside. Morning came hard and early, the way mornings do when you haven't slept. Caleb told Summer at breakfast, before anyone else was up, before Nora had finished her first cup, in the direct way that felt right with her. No preamble, no softening. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, "How long ago?" "Tuesday last week." 6 days. Something moved through her expression. Not fear, not anger, something more complicated than either. "The watering schedule for Zone 3. Someone opened the east gate 2 days ago. I thought it was an accident." She looked at the table. It wasn't an accident. Caleb went very still. "How much damage?" "The cattle grazed Zone 3 4 days before they were supposed to. The grass recovery there." She pressed her lips together. "It'll delay the timeline for that zone by 3 weeks. Maybe more." 3 weeks. In a 4-month window, 3 weeks mattered. "I'll handle Garrett and the other one today," Caleb said. "Yes." Her voice was measured, careful. And after that, we need to change the information flow. The men shouldn't know the full rotation schedule in advance. I'll give each team only their immediate next step." She looked at him. "It adds coordination work, but it closes the leak." "Whatever you need." She nodded. Her hands were flat on the table, and he noticed that they were very still. The stillness of someone holding something in very deliberately. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked at him, and for a moment the professional composure slipped, just at the edges, just enough to let through what was underneath it. Something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it. The particular vulnerability of a person who has put everything they believe in into a piece of work and has discovered that someone is actively trying to destroy it. "I'll be all right," she said. He held her gaze. "That's not what I asked." A beat. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not entirely all right." She looked at her hands. "This work, I know it probably looks like a job to people on the outside, but it's not. Every decision I've made on this land is connected to the next one. It's like an argument I've been building for 3 months, every piece leading to the next piece. And someone has been inside that argument, pulling pieces out." She exhaled. "It makes me feel stupid. And I don't often feel stupid." "You're not stupid," Caleb said. "You trusted the men working beside you. That's not stupidity. That's how it should work." She looked at him. He held her gaze and didn't look away, which was not as easy as it should have been. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because of what he found when he stayed there. Something he was not ready to name and was having increasing difficulty not noticing. "We fix it," he said. "Zone 3, the information flow, all of it. We fix it." She straightened. "Yes. Starting now." She pushed back her chair. Caleb handled Garrett that morning with the brevity that serious matters deserve. He did not raise his voice. He stated what he knew, gave the man a chance to respond, and when Garrett's response confirmed everything Roy had said, Caleb paid him through the end of the week and told him to be gone by noon. The other one, the boy from Livingston whose name turned out to be Katie, had taken the money and done nothing with it, frozen between the offer and his conscience. He was 19 years old and visibly terrified. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "Tell me everything Holloway asked you to report," he said. Katie told him. Every detail. The information was damaging, but not devastating. Holloway now knew the rotation schedule through Zone 2, but not Summers' plans for Zone 3 and beyond. "You're staying," Caleb said. Katie blinked. "Sir?" "You're staying, but you work for me, and for this ranch, and for no one else. If Holloway approaches you again, you come to me the same day." He fixed the boy with the kind of look his father had been legendary for. "Am I clear?" "Yes, sir. Go find Walt." Katie left at something close to a run. Walt appeared in the doorway a minute later. "Clean?" he asked. "Clean enough?" Caleb looked out the window toward the pastures. "Pull the new men, anyone hired in the last 6 months, off anything touching the rotation. Give them fence work, stock inventory, anything away from the core recovery plan." He turned. "Summer's going to restructure how the schedule information goes out. Support whatever she asks for." "Yes, sir." Walt paused. "For what it's worth, Deke and Roy and the older hands, they're solid. Whatever Holloway offered them, it wasn't enough." "I know." Caleb almost said something more. "Tell Deke I said so." Walt nodded and left. The day moved forward, the way days do even when they carry weight. The work continued. The land continued its slow, stubborn recovery. Zone 2 was looking better every morning. The North Well, with its repaired pump seal, was producing at the volume it should have been producing for the better part of a year. And somewhere in all of that, something that had been building for weeks between Caleb Whitmore and Summer Hayes was moving toward the moment when it would have to be named. It happened on a Thursday evening, and it happened because of a cow. One of the older heifers had gotten through a gap in the Zone 1 fencing, probably the section Deke hadn't gotten to before the remanagement, and had lodged herself in the irrigation channel, which was narrow and which she had navigated into with the particular genius of cattle for finding impossible situations and getting thoroughly stuck in them. Caleb heard the commotion from the house and arrived at the channel to find Summer already there, knee-deep in water, talking to the heifer in a low and completely earnest voice, as though the animal might respond to reason. "She won't come backward," Summer said without looking at him. "She has to go forward. If you can get to the other end and guide her through, she'll follow the channel out." How was in the channel before he'd thought about it, moving through water, reaching the other end where the channel widened, coaxing the heifer forward with the kind of patient, low-voiced persuasion that cattle sometimes respond to and sometimes absolutely don't. This one, eventually, did. She came forward. Summer guided from behind. The heifer emerged at the far end, stepped up onto the bank, shook herself with the supreme indignation of an animal that believes the entire situation was someone else's fault, and walked away. Caleb and Summer stood in the channel, knee-deep, both of them wet, both of them breathing a little harder than the situation strictly required. Summer started laughing. It came out of her suddenly, genuinely, the full laugh of someone who has been holding serious things for a long time and has just been given something ridiculous enough to break through. It transformed her face completely. Not the composed, professional face he'd been living alongside for 3 months, but something beneath it, something younger and less guarded and startlingly bright. He started laughing too. They stood there in the channel, soaking wet, laughing at a cow, and it was the most alive Caleb Whitmore had felt in more years than he could count. When it faded, they were both quieter than they'd been before it. Summer was close, the channel was narrow, and she was looking up at him with an expression he didn't have a category for. Not professional, not guarded, not the careful distance she maintained as a matter of policy. Something else entirely. "Summer," he said. "Don't," she said, quietly, not coldly, just carefully. He stopped. She looked at the water for a moment. "I know what I'm here to do. I know what we agreed to. I don't want to—" She stopped herself, looked back at him. "I don't want to make this complicated." "It might already be complicated," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. The kind of moment that tells you more than words do, because it doesn't end when it should, because both people let it go longer than they mean to. Then she looked away. "Help me get out of this channel," she said. He did. They walked back to the house separately, not quite in silence, not quite together, carrying something between them that had not been there when the day started, and that neither of them knew yet what to do with. Nora saw their wet boots at the door and made a sound that was not a question and not a comment, but contained the full weight of both. Nobody said anything. But that night, sitting at his desk, long after the house had gone quiet, Caleb picked up the paper he'd started writing on weeks ago, the one about what the ranch was and what it had been and what it was becoming. And he read what he'd written. Then he started a new page. This one wasn't about the ranch. He wrote for a long time. When he stopped, he folded the paper and put it in the drawer and locked it, and told himself it was too soon, and probably foolish, and definitely something he'd need to think more carefully about. He believed all of that. He also knew, with the certainty of a man who has spent enough years running from true things to recognize one when it's finally standing still, that whatever was written on that paper was the truest thing on the ranch. And the most dangerous. The paper in the drawer stayed locked for 4 days. Caleb didn't touch it. He walked past his desk a dozen times a day, and he did not open that drawer, and he told himself this was because he was busy, because the ranch demanded his attention, because there were 100 practical things that required him more urgently than a folded piece of paper he had written in the dark. All of that was true. None of it was the reason. The reason was simpler and harder. He was afraid. Not the practical fear of a man managing debt and drought and a land developer who played dirty. That kind of fear he knew how to carry. This was the other kind. The fear that lives in the chest, that tightens when you think about saying a true thing out loud and having it not received the way you meant it. The fear of being seen and found wanting. Caleb Whitmore had built a life on not feeling that fear. He had built walls thick enough and habits rigid enough that it rarely reached him. Summer Hayes had been dismantling those walls for 3 months, one honest conversation at a time, and she hadn't even been trying. That, he thought, was the most unsettling part. On the fifth morning after the night he'd written the paper, he came downstairs to find her already at the table with 2 cups of coffee, his included, and a look on her face that said she had been deciding something. He sat down. She slid his cup toward him. "I need to tell you something," she said. His stomach tightened. "Go ahead." "I heard from the Hargrove Institute yesterday. Dr. Hargrove is putting together a land restoration project in Colorado. 3 counties, federal funding, 2-year commitment." She looked at her cup. "He wants me to lead the soil assessment team. It's the kind of work I've been trying to get to for years." The kitchen felt very still. "When?" Caleb asked. "He needs an answer by the end of the month." "The end of the month?" He calculated. 5 weeks. The ranch will be in good shape by then. Not finished. Land restoration is never finished, but stable. The critical systems are working. Walt can manage the rotation with written guidance." She looked up at him. "It wouldn't be leaving you with nothing. It would be leaving you with a ranch that's actually running." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment, and he thought about all the things that were true that he could say, and all the things that were true that he couldn't say yet, and he sorted through them and found the one that was both honest and survivable. "Is that what you want?" he asked. She was quiet. "I don't know," she said. And the fact that she said that, the fact that Summer Hayes, who always knew, who had an answer for every practical question before he'd finished asking it, said "I don't know," told him more than a longer answer would have. He nodded slowly. "Then take the time to figure it out." She looked at him. "Caleb." "Take the time," he said again, quieter. "You've earned that much." She held his gaze for a moment, searching it for something. What, he wasn't sure. Whatever she found there, it seemed to be enough. She nodded and picked up her coffee, and they sat in a silence that pressed on him from every direction and that he bore as steadily as he could manage. When she left for the pastures, he sat alone at the table for a long time. Then Nora came in from the back and looked at his face and said, with the efficiency of a woman who has no patience for men being slow about important things, "Tell her." "Tell her what?" Nora gave him the look she had been giving him since he was 12 years old, the look that meant she found his evasions genuinely tiresome. "You know what?" He picked up his cup. "It's not the right time. It's never the right time. That's how people end up alone." She started making breakfast with the clipped, purposeful movements of someone registering a strong opinion without raising her voice. "Your father waited for the right time to tell your mother he loved her. Waited 2 full years. You know what happened?" He knew this story. She almost married someone else. She almost married Ed Fenwick, who was a perfectly decent man and would have made her comfortable, and who she would have been mildly satisfied with for the rest of her life. Nora cracked an egg with unnecessary force. "And your father finally said the thing he should have said 2 years earlier, and here you are." She looked at him. "Here you are, Caleb. Don't wait 2 years." He set his cup down. He did not go after Summer that morning, but he opened the desk drawer that night and read what he'd written, and this time he didn't lock it away again. He left the drawer open. Holloway's next move came not through lawyers or water boards or bunkhouse visits. It came through a newspaper. The Billings Gazette ran a piece on the following Monday. A small item, buried in the agricultural section, but precisely placed. It cited unnamed sources describing the Whitmore ranch recovery as overstated, and suggesting that the improvements were cosmetic and unlikely to survive the coming winter. It quoted a local land expert, unnamed, who expressed doubt that the ranch could meet its revised bank obligations. Caleb read it at breakfast, his jaw set in a way that Nora recognized and that caused her to quietly move the coffee pot to the far side of the stove. Summer read it across the table from him. She was very still while she read. Then she set it down. "He's shifting to public pressure," she said, "trying to spook the bank." Caleb folded the paper. "Make Aldrich think twice about the revised schedule and potential buyers for your cattle," she thought. "The fall market is 8 weeks out. If buyers come in already doubting the herd's condition—" "I know." His voice was tight. "I know what it does." She looked at him. "How do you want to handle it?" I want to go to Billings and... He stopped himself. He breathed. I want to respond in a way that doesn't make things worse. Yes. She pulled this paper back and read the piece again, more slowly. The Gazette will print a rebuttal if you provide documented evidence. Newspapers don't like being used as instruments. Not openly, anyway. If you can demonstrate that what they printed is factually inaccurate, they'll run a correction. She looked up. Gerald Pruitt's water board finding is public record. The bank's revised payment agreement is on file. I can produce a current assessment of the herd and the pasture recovery with specific, measurable data. She paused. We give the Gazette something they can verify independently, and we give them the story underneath the story. That a land developer is planting false information to manipulate a struggling ranch into foreclosure. Journalists find that more interesting than agricultural recovery reports. Caleb looked at her. You've done this before, he said. Not exactly this, but I've had to fight the story as much as the land before. She set the paper down. The Rennick situation in Wyoming. The landowner who fired me. After I left, he started telling people in the county that I'd mismanaged his land. I had to rebuild my professional reputation before anyone else would hire me. A beat. I know what it's like to fight something that moves in the press instead of on the ground. I thought about what that had cost her. A young woman, working alone, having to rebuild her name against a wealthy man's version of events. He thought about the 14-year-old girl watching her family lose their land, and the young professional losing her job for being right, and the woman sitting across from him now who had chosen, despite all of it, to keep doing the work the right way. Write the assessment, he said. I'll go to Billings Thursday. I'll have it done by Wednesday night. She had it done by Tuesday afternoon. Caleb read it that evening. 6 pages, precise, with enough technical specificity to be undeniable by anyone willing to check the numbers, and enough plain language to be understood by a newspaper editor who knew nothing about soil recovery. It was, he thought, one of the clearest pieces of writing he had ever read, because it was written by someone who understood that clarity itself is an argument. He found her at the south fence, checking the Zone 3 markers. This is good, he said, holding up the assessment. It needs to be accurate first. Good is secondary. It's both. He stopped beside her. Summer, I need to say something. She went still. She didn't look at him right away. Then, slowly, she did. Holloway is going to keep coming, he said. Even after the Gazette piece. Even after the water board finding. He doesn't stop because that's not who he is. And I've been thinking about what that means. He paused. It means the next thing he tries is going to be aimed at you specifically. She waited. He's already tried to hire you away. He's already tried to sabotage your work through the men. The press piece is partly about discrediting you professionally. Overstated improvements means he's attacking your credibility, not just the ranch. Caleb looked at her directly. When none of that works, and it won't work, he's going to find something personal. Something about you, or something he can manufacture about you, to use as leverage. She was quiet for a moment. I know. You've thought about this. I've been thinking about it since the bunkhouse. She looked at the fence line. There's something he could use, not from here, from before. She turned back to him, and her voice was steady, but her eyes were carrying something. The Wyoming situation. When I left the Rennick property, Rennick filed a complaint with the Hargrove Institute claiming I had deliberately damaged his land to force him to change his methods. It wasn't true. The Institute investigated and cleared me. But the complaint is on record. She paused. If Holloway finds it, and a man like that has the resources to find it, he can use it to make the Gazette story worse. Disgraced specialist brought in to manage struggling ranch. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Is there anything else he could find? No. Flat, clear, certain. That's everything. He nodded. Then we get ahead of it. How? You tell me your version first. To Aldrich at the bank, to the Gazette, to Pruitt. Anyone whose opinion matters. You put your version on record before Holloway puts his. He looked at her steadily. A complaint that was investigated and cleared is not a scandal. It's evidence that someone tried to discredit you before and failed." She stared at him. Something moved through her expression that he couldn't fully read. Surprise, maybe, at being defended in this particular way, with this particular logic, by this particular man. "That's—" She stopped. Tried again. "That's actually good thinking." "I have my moments," he said. She almost laughed. The almost was enough. "All right," she said. "I'll write it up. Add it to Thursday's package." She nodded. She turned back to the fence, but she was moving differently than she had been a few minutes ago. Lighter, he thought. The specific lightness of someone who has been carrying something alone and has just been told, for the first time, that they don't have to. He stood there a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he went back to the house. Thursday in Billings went better than either of them had planned for. Aldrich at the bank read Summer's assessment with the focused attention of a man who handles enough numbers daily to recognize when numbers are telling the truth. He asked 3 questions. Caleb answered 2 of them and said honestly, for the third, "Miss Hayes would answer that better than I can." Aldrich nodded as though this was itself an acceptable answer. At the Gazette, the editor, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara Hutchins, who had been running the agricultural section for 11 years, read the rebuttal and the supporting documentation and the preemptive account of the Wyoming complaint with the expression of someone watching a puzzle assemble itself. "You're telling me Holloway planted that piece," she said. "I'm telling you what I can document," Caleb said carefully. "What conclusions you draw from that documentation is your business." Clara Hutchins looked at him, then at the documents, then at him again. "When can I speak with Miss Hayes directly?" "Whenever she's available." "Friday?" "I'll ask her." She came to Billings on Friday and spent 2 hours with Clara Hutchins and came back to the ranch that evening quieter than she'd left, with the focused inward look of someone who has just done something that required significant courage and is still processing how it went. Caleb met her in the yard. "Well," he said, "she's running a piece next Wednesday about the pattern of Holloway's land acquisitions across the county, the timing relative to bank letters, the water board claim, the Gazette item." Summer looked at him. She'd been looking into him already. She just needed the thread to pull. He stared. "You gave her the story." "We gave her the story." She met his eyes. "The Wyoming piece will be in there too. Full account, the investigation, the clearance." She was fair about it. Something crossed her face. She said, and I'm quoting here, "A woman who keeps doing the right thing after she's been punished for it is more credible, not less." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "She's right," he said. Summer looked at him with that look again, the one he'd been seeing more frequently in the past weeks, the one he didn't have a category for and had stopped trying to create one. She looked at him like he was something she was still deciding whether to believe in. He wanted, more than he'd wanted most things in recent memory, to be worth believing in. "Come eat dinner," he said. "Nora made something that requires the whole table to do it justice." She followed him inside. The Gazette piece ran the following Wednesday, and it was, as Clara Hutchins had promised, thorough. It named Holloway directly. It documented 4 separate instances across 3 counties where his acquisition of distressed properties had been preceded by what appeared to be coordinated pressure, bank sources, planted newspaper items, legal interference. It included the water board finding. It quoted Gerald Pruitt, who turned out to have opinions about Richard Holloway that he had been waiting for an appropriate moment to express. And it included a profile of Summer Hayes, her background, her work, the Wyoming situation presented in full with the Institute's clearance front and center, and a detailed account of the Whitmore Ranch recovery, with numbers. Caleb read it at breakfast. Summer read it across from him. When she finished, she set the paper down and looked at the table and did not say anything for a moment. Then, "My name is in a newspaper." "Yes." "For the right reasons." "For the right reasons." She picked up her coffee. Her hands were not entirely steady. He noticed. He said nothing about it, but he moved his coffee cup 2 inches closer to hers, and he left it there. She noticed. She said nothing about it either. Holloway's response to the Gazette piece came within 48 hours, and it was, finally, the move that proved he was running out of room. He sent a letter to Caleb through his lawyer, and unlike the legal document from the water board, this one was brief and plainly written. It offered to purchase the entire Whitmore ranch, not just the East Quarter, but the whole operation, at a price that was, Caleb had to admit, more than fair market value. He read it twice. He took it to Summer. She read it once. "He's panicking," she said immediately. "It's a good offer." "It's a great offer." She set it on the desk. "That's the point. He wouldn't offer this much if he thought he had another angle." The Gazette piece closed his other options. "He's gone straight to the buyout because it's all he has left." She looked at Caleb. "He doesn't want the ranch. He wants you to sell so he can say his development plan for this area is viable. Your recovery is proving it isn't." Caleb looked at the letter. "I thought about what it would mean to take that offer. The bank would be paid. The debt would be gone. He could start somewhere else, smaller, without the weight of 3 generations of expectation pressing on every decision. He could walk away clean." He folded the letter. "No," he said. Summer watched him. "Write back to Holloway's lawyer," he said. "Standard response. Offer received. Under consideration. Buy us some time without closing the door." He looked at her. "And then you and I are going to the bank to show Aldrich the Gazette piece and have a conversation about the fall cattle market." She held his gaze. "You're sure?" "I've been sure since the first morning I saw that thread of green in the grass." He picked up his coat. "I'm not selling this ranch. I'm not walking away from what you've built here." A pause. "What we've built," she said quietly. He looked at her. The word hung there between them, small and significant, the kind of correction that means more than the word itself. "What we've built," he agreed. He held the door for her, and they walked out into the yard together, and the morning was clear, and the cattle were moving in the Zone 3 pasture, exactly as Summer's rotation schedule intended, and the East Channel was running clean, and the North Well was producing, and the land that had been dying 3 months ago was doing something that Caleb would not let himself call beautiful, because he was not a man who used words like that freely, but that he felt in the particular way that people feel true things, not as a thought, but as a kind of quiet certainty that settles in the body before the mind has caught up with it. They rode to Billings together. Aldrich heard them out, looked at the Gazette piece, looked at the updated cattle projections, and made a phone call to 2 of his colleagues, while Caleb and Summer waited in the hall outside his office. When they went back in, Aldrich was sitting differently. Not the forward-leaning posture of a man managing risk, but the settled posture of a man who has made a decision. "I'm going to extend the revised schedule by 30 days and reduce the interest rate on the remaining balance," he said. "Effective immediately." He looked at Summer. "The assessment you produced is the clearest document I've received about a struggling property in the 15 years I've been in this office. I'd like your permission to share the methodology with 2 other ranches in the county that are in similar situations." Summer blinked. "You have it." Aldrich nodded. He looked at Caleb. "You've got good people around you, Whitmore." "I know," Caleb said. And he looked briefly at Summer when he said it, and she was looking at the window, but the line of her jaw had changed in the way it changed when she was keeping her expression carefully neutral. They rode home mostly in silence, the comfortable kind. Halfway back, on the long straight stretch of road between Billings and the ranch, Summer said, without preamble, "I'm going to turn down the Colorado position." Caleb held his horse's pace, steady, careful. "When did you decide?" "I think I decided before I knew I'd decided." She looked straight ahead. "The work here isn't finished, and She stopped, tried again. "I don't want to leave something I've built in the middle of building it." He let that sit for a moment. "Is that the only reason?" he asked. She was quiet for a beat too long. "No," she said finally. He didn't push for the rest of it. He didn't need to. The road ran straight between them, and the air was dry and smelled of grass and turned earth, and Caleb Whitmore rode beside the woman who had saved his ranch and thought about the paper in his desk drawer and decided, quietly and firmly, that it was time. Not today. The day had been full enough, but soon. The storm arrived on a Saturday. It came faster than the forecast suggested. Montana weather had a habit of making predictions look naive. And by mid-morning, the sky had changed color in the particular way that experienced ranchers learn to read as urgency. Walt found Caleb at 10:15. "It's going to be bad," Walt said. "The east fence is already moving in the wind. If it goes down, we lose the Zone 2 cattle. Get every man to the east fence. I'll take the north." "The channel." Caleb stopped. "What about it? If the rain comes as hard as it looks like it's going to, the channel's going to fill faster than the output can handle. The rebuilt section isn't flood-tested yet." Walt's expression was carefully controlled. "If it backs up and the pressure exceeds the mortar strength, it could break the rebuild." "Yes, sir." Caleb stood for 1 second. "Where's Summer?" "Already at the channel. She went out 15 minutes ago." He was moving before Walt finished the sentence. He found her at the east channel with 2 of the older hands, Roy and Deke, working to clear additional outflow space at the southern exit. The wind was serious now, pressing flat and cold, and the first heavy drops were beginning. "The outflow isn't wide enough to handle a fast fill," she said when she saw him. No greeting, no preamble, pure focus. "We need to extend it 12 feet south. I need 2 shovels and someone to brace the side wall while I direct the dig. Roy, get the shovels from the north barn. Deke, brace the east wall." He turned to her. "Tell me where to dig." She looked at him for half a second, just enough to register that he was here, that he was asking her to direct him, that he wasn't trying to take over. Then she pointed. "Start there. 2 feet down, angle south, fast." He dug. The rain came properly 20 minutes later, not gradually, the way summer rain sometimes builds, but all at once, the way Montana storms prefer, like a decision finally made. Within the first hour, the channel filled to 3/4 capacity, which was faster than Summer had projected, and she said so without distress, just as information, adjusting her calculations in real time, while standing in the rain, directing all of them on where to cut, where to brace, where to yield. Caleb had worked this land in storms before. He had worked alongside men who knew their jobs and did them well. He had never worked alongside someone like this, someone who could think and act simultaneously, who didn't freeze under pressure, who got calmer as conditions got worse, the way certain people do who have had enough hard things happen to them that urgency no longer reads as emergency. By early afternoon, the outflow extension was done. The channel held. They stood at the edge of it, all 4 of them, watching the water move through the rebuilt section at full capacity and out through the newly extended outflow into the south drainage, exactly as it should. Roy made a sound of deep satisfaction. Deke said, to no one in particular, "I'll be damned." Summer was soaking wet, mud to the knee, hair completely undone from whatever had been holding it, and she was watching the water flow with an expression of such concentrated, unguarded relief that Caleb felt it like something physical in the center of his chest. Roy and Deke walked back toward the barn. Caleb and Summer stayed at the channel. The rain was steady now, quieter than it had been at the peak, the kind of rain that has made its point and is now simply finishing the job. They were both already as wet as they were going to get, so there was no particular reason to hurry. "The rebuild held," Caleb said. "Yes." Her voice was soft. "Your grandfather's stonework and your repair work." He looked at the channel, both of them holding at the same time. She turned to look at him at that, and something in her expression shifted, moved, the way stone shifts when water has been working beneath it for long enough. "I thought about my family's farm today," she said, "while we were digging." She looked back at the channel. What it would have meant if someone had done this for them, showed up and just dug, in the rain, without being asked. He looked at her. She looked at him. The rain fell between them and around them, and neither of them moved. "Summer," he said. "I know," she said quietly. "I need to say it." "I know that too." He took 1 step toward her, in the mud and the rain, in the field his grandfather had worked, and his father had worked, and that he had nearly lost, and had not lost because of the woman standing in front of him. "I'm not going to offer you a deal," he said. I'm not going to make a proposal based on what I need or what would benefit the ranch, or what makes practical sense. I did that once, and it was the most wrong I've ever been about anything." He paused. "I'm going to tell you the truth, which is that this place is different because you're in it, and I'm different because you're in it. And I wrote those things down weeks ago, and I've been too afraid to say them out loud, and I'm done being afraid of this particular thing." She was very still. "I love you," he said. "That's the truth. That's all of it." The rain came down. Summer Hayes looked at Caleb Whitmore in the field she had helped restore, in the storm they had just survived together, and her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with rain. "You were afraid," she said. "Yes." Caleb Whitmore. Afraid. "It happens." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she closed the distance between them, not waiting, not hesitating, and she put her hands on his face, cold from the rain, and she said, very close, "I wrote things down too." "What things?" "The same things," she said. And then she kissed him, in the rain, in the field, beside the channel that was holding, in the middle of the ranch that was alive. He put his arms around her, and the rain kept falling, and the water kept moving, and somewhere across the pasture, the cattle stood in the new grass of Zone 3, and the land that had been dying held them both up, steady and solid, the way good land does when someone has finally learned to take care of it. When they pulled apart, she was laughing again. The full laugh, the real one. "We are absolutely soaking wet," she said. "Yes." "And standing in a field in the middle of a storm." "Yes." She shook her head, still laughing, and leaned her forehead against his shoulder for just a moment. Brief, warm, real. "Come on," she said. "Nora's going to say she told you so. She absolutely will. Are you ready for that?" He took her hand. "I've been ready for that for weeks," he said. They walked back toward the house together, through the rain, through the recovering land, through everything they had built and saved and almost lost and held on to, and behind them the channel ran clean and full and steady. As it would, from that day forward, for a very long time. Nora said "I told you so" before they were fully through the door. She didn't use those words exactly. What she did was look at the two of them, soaking wet, mud-covered, hands still loosely connected, and she set down the dish she was drying with the particular care of a woman placing something fragile, and she said, finally, in a tone that contained every conversation she had not had, every pointed look she had deployed, every strategic cup of coffee she had poured for two people who needed to sit closer together and figure out what was obvious to everyone watching them. Summer laughed. Caleb looked at the ceiling. "Don't," he said. "I haven't said a word," Nora said, already moving to get towels, radiating satisfaction like a stove radiates heat. They changed out of their wet clothes and came back to the kitchen separately, which was a formality that convinced no one, and sat at the table while Nora made dinner and pretended she wasn't listening to everything with her entire body. It was the best evening the house had seen in years. Not because anything grand happened, no declaration, no formal conversation about what came next. Just the particular ease of two people who have finally stopped pretending, who can sit in the same room and breathe the same air without managing the space between them. Walt came in from the barns at dusk with a damage report from the storm. The east fence had held. Zone 2 had taken some water, but nothing that set back the recovery. The rebuilt channel section had performed exactly as it was designed to perform. He delivered all of this to Caleb, and then he looked at the table, at the 2 cups of coffee sitting closer together than they used to, at something in the way Summer was sitting, at something in the way Caleb was not performing composure the way he usually did. And Walt, who was not a demonstrative man, smiled. It was brief. It was real. "Good evening, Miss Hayes," he said. "Good evening, Walt." He got his own coffee and went back out without another word. But the smile stayed, out in the dark somewhere, and the men in the bunkhouse would hear about it later, and by morning the entire ranch would know, the way ranches always know everything, through the specific wireless transmission system of people who live and work in close quarters and pay attention. The week after the storm was the week everything the ranch had been building toward finally became undeniable. The fall cattle assessment was scheduled for the following Thursday, and it was the number that mattered most. The number that would tell the market, the bank, and everyone watching whether the Whitmore recovery was real or whether the Gazette piece had been optimistic. Buyers came from 2 counties over. They brought their own men to evaluate the herd, because buyers always do, because hope is one thing and verified condition is another. Summer had been preparing for this since week 4 of her time on the ranch. Every grazing decision, every rotation adjustment, every calculation about nutrition and grass recovery, it had all been aimed, in part, at this Thursday. She didn't say that out loud. She didn't need to. On Wednesday night, she sat at the dinner table with her notebook and her numbers one last time, checking her projections against what she knew the herd actually was, and Caleb sat across from her and watched her work with the particular attention of a man who has recently stopped pretending he isn't watching. "How are we?" he asked. She looked up. "We're better than I projected in August. The Zone 3 recovery outpaced my timeline by almost 2 weeks. The cattle in that zone are showing condition scores I wouldn't have believed possible when I first walked this land." She closed the notebook. "We're going to be all right tomorrow." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She met his eyes. "I've been sure for about 3 weeks. I just didn't want to say it until it was tomorrow." He understood that. The superstition of not naming good things too early, in case naming them made them fragile. "Get some sleep," he said. "You too." Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Nora appeared in the doorway in her nightdress, with the expression of a woman who has stayed up later than she should have and has no regrets about it, and said, "Both of you, bed. The cattle will be fine." They went to bed. Thursday morning arrived clear and cold, the specific clarity that Montana produces in early fall as a kind of gift before the hard months begin. The buyers came at 8. There were 4 of them, plus their 2 assessors, and they moved through the herd with the professional efficiency of men who have done this many times and know exactly what to look for. Caleb walked with them. Summer stayed back. Her work was done, and she understood that the transaction belonged to Caleb, that her role here was finished in the way that good work finishes, not with fanfare, but with results. She waited near the north fence with Walt. Walt, who did not make small talk, made small talk. He talked about the weather, about the fence repair schedule, about whether Roy's knees were going to make it through another winter. Summer answered him and watched the buyers move through the herd from a distance. After an hour and 40 minutes, the lead buyer, a thick-set man named Garrison, who ran the largest cattle operation in the next county, walked back to where Caleb was standing, and they talked for about 10 minutes. She couldn't hear the words. She could see the body language. Garrison was not a man who gestured when he talked. He gestured now. He pointed at the herd. He pointed at the pasture. He said something that made Caleb go very still for a moment. Then Caleb nodded. Garrison put out his hand. Caleb shook it. Walt, beside Summer, exhaled the way a man exhales who has been holding his breath so long he's forgotten he was doing it. "Good?" Summer said quietly. "That handshake means good," Walt said. Caleb came back across the yard toward them at a pace that was controlled and deliberate, the pace of a man keeping himself from moving faster. And when he reached them, he looked at Summer and said simply, "He offered 12% above last year's market price. He wants first right of purchase next fall as well. 12% above market. On a herd that 3 months ago had been losing weight." Walt made the sound again. Summer was quiet. "Say something," Caleb said. "I'm doing the math," she said. He waited. She looked up. "That covers the bank payment, the full revised balance, with enough remaining to fund the Zone 4 expansion through spring." "Yes." "And next fall's purchase agreement, if the herd continues at this rate." "Summer." She stopped. "Say something that isn't math," he said. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had stood in a dying field in August and offered marriage like a transaction and had turned, over the months between then and now, into someone she had not expected and could not imagine leaving. "You did it," she said. "We did it." "You did it," she said again, firmer. "I helped. But this is your land, your family's land, 3 generations of it, and it's still here. and it's going to keep being here." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not entirely. "That matters, Caleb. What you held on to matters." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Walt. "Give everyone the afternoon off." Walt raised an eyebrow. "The whole? Everyone. Full afternoon. Tell them it's from the ranch." Walt almost smiled again. He was getting better at it. "Yes, sir." He walked away toward his bunkhouse, and Caleb turned back to Summer. And it was the first time they had been genuinely alone in the open yard without a task in front of them, without a crisis to manage, or a document to produce, or a problem to solve. She looked at him with a directness that was entirely her own. "What now?" "Now," he said. "I have something to show you." I went inside and came back with the paper from the desk drawer, the one he had written weeks ago and locked away, and then unlocked and left in the drawer and carried in his mind every day since. He gave it to her. She looked at it. At the outside of it, folded, not yet opened. "What is this?" "Read it." She unfolded it slowly. He watched her eyes move across the page. He had written it in the dark, without planning, the way real things are written. Not for an audience, not with revision, just the truth laid out in the order it occurred to him. He had written about the thread of green in the grass, about the way she listened, about the evening she said we built, instead of you built, and what that word had done to him. About a 14-year-old girl who lost her family's land and spent the next 13 years making sure it never happened to someone else, and what it said about a person that they could do that they could take a wound and make it into a way of caring for other people. He had written, "I am not a man who says these things easily. I am telling you anyway, because I am done with easy." Summer read it all. When she finished, she held it for a moment without looking up. Then she said, "You locked this in a drawer?" "Yes." "For weeks?" "Yes." She looked up. Her eyes were very bright. "Caleb Whitmore, you wrote me a love letter and locked it in a drawer." "That is accurate." "And you're giving it to me now?" "I'm giving it to you now." She looked at the paper again, back at him. Something moved through her face that was too full to name. Every feeling at once, the way a field looks after good rain when everything is trying to grow in the same moment. "I have to tell you something," she said. His chest tightened. "Go ahead." "The night you told me what you were feeling. In the rain." She folded the paper carefully, exactly along its original lines. "I went back to my room, and I wrote something too, on a page from my notebook." She met his eyes. "I'll give you mine if you want it." He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "I want it," he said. She went inside and came back with a torn notebook page, not folded neatly like his, because Summer's writing was a working thing, a living thing, covered in margin notes and underlines and one small correction. She handed it to him. He read it. She had written about the first morning she walked his land, and saw not a dying thing, but a thing that still had the capacity for life, if someone was willing to do the patient, difficult, unglamorous work of restoring it. She had written about recognizing in him, slowly, against his considerable resistance, the same quality, the same capacity. She had written about the night with the pump report when he said, "I see you," and what those two words had done to her, because no one had ever said them to her before. Not about the work, not about the person doing it, not with that particular quietness that meant he actually meant it. She had written, at the bottom of the page in smaller letters, as if she'd almost talked herself out of including it, "I am going to stay. Not because the work requires it, because I want to know what this becomes." He looked up. "You wrote this the same night," he said. "Yes." "We both—" "Yes." He looked at the paper and then at her, and he laughed. The full, real laugh that she had heard from him rarely, and that transformed him, that took 10 years off his face and made him look like the man he might have been before his father died and the land started dying, and the weight of 3 generations settled on him like weather. She laughed too. They stood in the yard with each other's words in their hands, laughing, and the afternoon light came across the recovering pastures, and the cattle were settled in Zone 3, and the East Channel ran clean beneath them, and the north well pumped steady and reliable from the good water that had been there all along. The formal proposal happened 3 days later. Not in the field this time, not in the rain. Caleb had given the occasion some thought. He was a man who, when he finally decided to do a thing, did it with intention. And he chose the East Channel because it was where the work had truly begun, where the land had first shown them what was possible, where summer had stood in mud to her knees and proved, to everyone watching and to herself, that she could do what she said she could do. He had talked to Nora the night before. He had talked to Walt. He had, in the way of a man who respects the people around him, made sure that the people who mattered knew what was coming. Roy Nettles found out through channels that remained opaque and showed up at the barn at 7 in the morning, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man trying not to look like he's waiting for something. Caleb found Summer at the channel, which was where she was every morning, checking the flow levels and recording them in her notebook with the same diligence she had brought on day one. He stopped beside her. She looked up from her notebook. She read his face the way she always did. That quick, complete reading that missed nothing. And whatever she saw there made her close the notebook and give him her full attention. "I'm going to do this properly," he said, "because the first time I did it wrong in every possible way. You offered to marry me in front of 30 ranch hands as a way of testing whether I'd back down," she said. "I did. You thought I was going to fail. I was wrong about that within the first week." She tilted her head. "Go ahead." He did not kneel. He had considered it and decided that kneeling was not the language between them. Their language was standing face to face, equal, direct. He stood in front of her at the channel his grandfather had built and that she had restored, and he said, "I want to build something with you that isn't a transaction, not a business arrangement, not a deal, not a test, and not a rescue operation. I want to build a life with you, here, on this land, in this work, because you are the person I want beside me for everything that comes next. The good seasons and the bad ones. The things we can plan for and the things we can't." He paused. "I am asking you, Summer Hayes, because I love you, and because this ranch is better with you in it, and I am better with you in it, and I am done pretending those are separate things." He opened his hand. His mother's ring. Simple gold, a small stone the color of the Montana sky in the hours before dawn. The kind of ring that had been chosen by a man who loved a woman well and knew it and wanted her to know it every time she looked at her hand. Summer looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She said, "The first time you asked me, it was because you were desperate." "Yes." "This time?" "This time," he said, "it's because I would ask you even if everything was fine, even if the bank had never sent a letter, even if the land had never been in trouble, even if you had never shown up with a notebook and turned my entire ranch and my entire life upside down." He kept her gaze. "I would find you and I would ask you." She was very still for a moment. Then she said, "Yes." Just that. Just the word. Clear and clean and entirely without hesitation. He put the ring on her finger and she looked at it for a moment. At the way it caught the morning light. At the way it sat on the hand that had pulled debris from channels and taken measurements in the rain and written 12 pages of documentation that saved the ranch and written half a page in a notebook that saved something more important. Then she looked at him. "Don't make me regret this," she said. He almost smiled. "You won't." "I know I won't. I'm just saying it for the principle." He did smile then. "Understood." She took his hand. They walked back toward the house where Nora was absolutely not watching from the kitchen window, and where Walt was absolutely not standing near the barn with Roy Nettles, and where Deke Paulson and 6 other ranch hands were absolutely not gathered near the fence, pretending to work on something that required all of them in the same location at the same time. When they came through the gate hand in hand, no one said anything for a moment. Then Roy Nettles took off his hat, and one by one, quietly, the others did too. The wedding was in October, when the grass was the color of honey, and the recovered pastures had held through their first real test. They were married on the ranch, in the yard, in front of the people who had worked the land and fought for it and believed in it through the worst months and the turning ones. No hired minister from the city. The county judge came out on a Saturday morning and did it in the practical, unadorned way that legal things are done in Montana, with Walt as witness on one side and Nora on the other, and the rest of the ranch gathered behind them in the clear fall air. Summer wore her everyday dress. The good one, the dark blue one that Nora had pressed that morning with quiet ceremony. She carried nothing. She needed nothing in her hands. Her hands had been the point of her all along. Caleb wore his father's coat. He had taken it from the back of the wardrobe that morning without thinking too hard about the symbolism, because the symbolism was obvious, and he was done being a man who avoided obvious things. He wore his father's coat to marry the woman who had saved his father's land, and he stood in the yard of the ranch that 3 generations of Whitmores had built, and he said the words clearly and without rush, because he meant all of them. When it was done, and the judge had said the necessary words, and Walt had produced, from somewhere, a bottle of whiskey that was better than anything the bunkhouse normally held, Roy Nettles raised his glass and said, in the way of a man who has lived long enough to know what matters, to the land, and to the people who know how to love it. They drank. Summer stood beside Caleb with the whiskey she'd accepted and wasn't planning to finish, and looked at the yard full of people who had doubted her and come around and worked beside her. And she felt something she hadn't felt since before her family lost their farm. The specific feeling of belonging to a place. Not just working in it. Not just passing through it. Belonging to it. In the way that people belong to places when both of them have given something real to each other. She thought about her family's farm. About the 14-year-old girl who had stood in a dying field and watched everything come apart, and decided, somewhere in that grief, that she was going to understand the language of land well enough to stop it from happening to other people. She had not known then that the path would lead here. She had not known she would find a ranch that needed saving, and a man who needed saving more, and that saving both of them would turn out to be the same work. She held Caleb's hand and looked at the recovering pastures and thought, this is what the work was, all of it. Every hard year and every professional wound and every morning she had gotten up and done the work anyway, when there was no particular reason to believe it would be enough. It had all been moving toward this. The years that followed were not easy years. The land never promises easy, and they both knew that. There were hard winters and dry summers, and cattle lost to disease in the 3rd year, and a fence line that seemed to require eternal maintenance. There were disagreements, because 2 people with strong minds living and working in the same place will always have disagreements, and they had theirs with the directness that both of them brought to everything. Stated plainly, argued fully, resolved without festering, because Summer had no patience for festering, and Caleb had learned, slowly and well, that unspoken things cost more than spoken ones. There were good years, too. Seasons when the land gave back everything they had put into it, and more. The cattle operation became, by the 5th year, the most consistently productive in the county. Buyers came to them now, not the other way around. Aldrich from the bank visited in the 4th year. Not professionally, but because he had driven out to see with his own eyes what the numbers had been describing. He stood at the edge of the Zone 4 pasture, which had been waste ground when summer arrived and was now the strongest section of the property, and he said nothing for a long time. Then he said, I almost didn't give you the revised schedule. I know, Caleb said. I'm glad I did. So am I. They shook hands. Summer asked Aldrich to share her recovery methodology with the 2 other ranches he'd mentioned, and she spent 3 days the following spring consulting with both of them, driving out with her notebook and her boots and her steady, particular way of listening to land and the people on it. One of those ranches turned around. The other was too far gone. She was honest about both outcomes in the same way she was honest about everything, without drama, without false comfort, with the clear-eyed directness that people either trusted completely or found impossible, and which was the same quality either way. Dr. Hargrove came to visit in the 6th year. He rode out from Billings and walked the ranch with Caleb and Summer for an entire afternoon, asking questions in the way of a man who is genuinely learning, rather than confirming what he already knows. At the end of the afternoon, he said to Summer, "The Colorado project you turned down. I want you to know, the woman I hired instead was competent. She did good work. But this..." He gestured at the land around them. "This is what I hoped Colorado would be." Summer looked at the land. Colorado would have been a good project, she said honestly. This is a good life. Hargrove looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Summer. Hargrove smiled the smile of a man who recognizes something real when he stands next to it. Richard Holloway left the county in the 5th year. The Gazette piece had done lasting damage to his reputation among the ranching community, and 2 of his previous land sales were subsequently investigated by the state for misrepresentation of land quality. He sold his local holdings, including the adjacent property he had used to file the water board claim, and moved his operation to another state, which solved his immediate problem and someone else's. The day they heard, Walt told Caleb over breakfast, with the brevity of a man reporting a weather change. Caleb told Summer that evening. She was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. Then she went back to her notebook. That was all. Some ends are like that. Not dramatic, just finished. A threat that moved on, a pressure that lifted, a chapter that closed without ceremony. The land didn't care about Holloway's departure any more than it had cared about his interference. The land only cared about what was being put into it and what was being asked of it. And on the Whitmore Hayes Ranch, those things were in balance now, and had been for years. Walt retired in the 7th year, and Caleb shook his hand in the yard on a cold October morning and thanked him for the 31 years, and Walt said, in his economy, "You kept the faith." He moved to a smaller property outside of Billings where his daughter lived, and he sent a letter every Christmas that grew warmer and less restrained each year, as if retirement was slowly teaching him to say what he'd always meant. Dike Paulson became foreman. He turned out to be good at it. Decisive, fair, with the specific credibility of a man who had been skeptical and changed his mind, which made his authority earned in a way that inherited authority never quite is. He ran the rotation schedule that Summer had designed, updated it when the land required updating, and came to Summer when he had questions without any trace of the man who had made pointed comments in the stable on her second morning. On a morning in October of the 8th year, Caleb stood at the edge of the upper pasture at just past 5 in the morning. He held a cup of black coffee. His right hand rested on the top rail of the fence post. The same post, replaced now, solid, the lean long corrected. The grass was thick and green under the morning light. The cattle moved through it with the settled, unhurried energy of animals that are fed and watered and well. He heard footsteps behind him. He didn't turn around. A second cup of coffee appeared beside his on the rail. Summer stood next to him and looked out at the land they had built together. The channels that ran clean, the wells that held, the 6 grazing zones rotating through their careful seasonal rhythm, the Zone 4 pasture that had been the best surprise, the south fence line that Deke kept in better shape than anyone. They stood in the early quiet for a long time without saying anything, because they had learned, together, the value of that particular quiet. The quiet that comes after the hard work, that lives in places where people have put real things into the ground and waited and tended and held on through the seasons that tested what they'd planted. "You're doing it again," Summer said finally. "Doing what?" "Standing here at 5 in the morning, looking at the land. I did this before you arrived." "I know, but it looked different then." He turned to look at her. She was looking at the pasture, but she was smiling. The real smile, the full one, the one that still did to him exactly what it had always done. "How did it look?" he asked. She thought about it. Like a man waiting for bad news. "And now?" She looked at him. "Like a man who knows where he is," she said. He reached out and took her hand, and they stood together at the fence of the Whitmore Hayes Ranch as the sun came fully up over the Montana land. The land that had been dying and was alive. The land that had been lost and was found. The land that had been worked by 3 generations of one family and was now, finally, beginning its 4th. Not because money had saved it. Not because luck had saved it. Because a man had been willing to be wrong about everything he thought he knew, and a woman had been willing to stay long enough to show him what the land was really saying, and because between the 2 of them they had done the patient, unglamorous, faithful work of restoration, on the soil and the water and the grass, and on themselves. The ranch held them. The land held them. The life they had built from the ruins of a dying season held them, steady and deep-rooted, the way all things hold when someone has finally learned to take care of them. That was the truth of the Whitmore Hayes Ranch. That was the truth of them. And it was enough, more than enough, to last.